The diner fell strangely quiet the moment the little girl raised her trembling hand and pointed toward the towering biker sitting beside her. Outside, rain tapped against the glass windows like nervous fingers. Inside, the smell of coffee and fried bacon hung heavy in the air. No one noticed the fear in her eyes at first, no one except the man she had chosen. A man whose leather vest carried the unmistakable emblem of a notorious motorcycle club. A man whose face looked like it had been carved from years of rough roads, bad nights, and harder choices. And in a voice so small it almost disappeared beneath the hum of the diner lights, the little girl asked him to pretend to be her father. Before we step into what happened next, take a moment to support stories like this. If you believe that kindness can appear in the most unexpected places, if you believe people deserve second chances, please like this video, leave a comment. Share it with someone who believes in humanity, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps more stories like this reach people who need them. The man everyone in the diner feared was named Cain. Most people in town knew him simply as Cain. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed entirely in black leather. His beard was streaked with gray, and his knuckles carried scars from fights long forgotten. The patch on his vest showed the unmistakable wings and skull associated with the Hells Angels motorcycle club. It was enough to make most people avoid eye contact with him. But that morning, Cain had come to the diner for the same reason he did every Sunday. Quiet, coffee, eggs, a moment of peace before the road called him again. He had barely taken his second sip of coffee when he noticed the small hand pointing toward him. The girl sitting in the booth across the aisle looked no older than 6. She wore a pink jacket that was slightly too big for her and clutched a small stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest. Her blonde hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and her wide blue eyes were locked onto Cain like he was the only lifeline she had left. Beside her sat a man who looked uncomfortable in his own skin. His leather vest carried a similar patch to Cain's, but he wasn't part of the same club. His beard was thick, his arms covered in tattoos, and his plate of food sat untouched as he stared at the little girl beside him. But Cain noticed something others didn't. The girl wasn't pointing at him out of curiosity, she was pointing at him out of fear. Cain slowly set his coffee cup down. Years of riding with rough men had sharpened his instincts, and something in the air felt wrong. The girl's fingers trembled as she pointed, and her small body leaned slightly away from the man sitting next to her. People in the diner began glancing over. Some whispered, some looked nervous. Because if there was one thing everyone knew about bikers wearing those patches, it was that trouble often followed them like a shadow. But the little girl kept looking at Cain. And in that moment, something stirred in a place inside him he thought had died years ago. It was a memory of a hospital room filled with silence. A memory of a tiny hand slipping from his own. Cain once had a daughter. Her name had been Emily. She had loved stuffed animals too. The thought struck him like a punch to the chest. And suddenly, Cain understood exactly what the little girl was asking. She wasn't asking for help loudly, she was begging for it quietly. Cain stood up. The scraping sound of his chair against the diner floor echoed like thunder in the sudden silence. Every eye turned toward him as he walked slowly toward the booth. His heavy boots thudded against the black and white tiled floor. Step by step, the man sitting beside the girl looked up, annoyed at first, then wary as Cain stopped beside the booth. Cain didn't say anything. He simply placed one large hand gently on the top of the booth seat and looked down at the little girl. Her eyes filled with tears, and she moved closer to him. The biker sitting beside her stiffened. People in the diner held their breath, because now something invisible had shifted. Cain reached down and gently rested his hand on the girl's shoulder. The simple gesture felt enormous. The girl leaned into him immediately, clutching her stuffed rabbit like it was armor. The man beside her tried to laugh it off, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. Cain's voice, when it finally came, was calm and low. He didn't need to raise it. The room was so silent everyone could hear every word, but what mattered more wasn't what he said. It was the message behind it, the message that the girl was not alone anymore. The biker beside her suddenly found himself staring at a man twice his size with a reputation that stretched across 3 states. Cain wasn't just another biker. He was known among the clubs as someone who didn't bluff. The waitress behind the counter quietly picked up the phone. Outside, a police cruiser slowly passed by the diner window. Inside, Cain's presence filled the space like a storm cloud. The man beside the girl shifted in his seat. His confidence was fading quickly, because predators rely on silence and fear. And Cain had just shattered both. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the man stood up abruptly and muttered something under his breath before leaving the booth. He grabbed his jacket and walked toward the door without finishing his meal. The bell above the diner door rang as he stepped outside into the rain. No one followed him. No one stopped him. But everyone watched him go. When the door closed again, the tension in the diner finally broke. The girl burst into quiet sobs and wrapped her arms around Cain's waist. The tough biker froze. He hadn't expected that part. Cain stood there awkwardly for a moment before slowly placing a protective arm around her small shoulders. For the first time in years, the man known as Cain didn't feel like a biker. He felt like something he thought he could never be again: a father. The waitress approached carefully and asked if the girl was okay. The little girl explained through tears that the man had told her mother he would take her to breakfast while her mother worked the morning shift at a nearby store. But during the ride, his behavior had changed. He had started acting strange and angry, and the diner had been the first place she felt safe enough to ask for help. And somehow, out of all the people in the room, she had chosen the most intimidating man there. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Cain gently helped her finish her pancakes while the diner staff contacted the girl's mother and local authorities. He sat there quietly while she ate, occasionally pushing the syrup bottle closer to her or handing her a napkin. Customers who once avoided looking at him now watched in silence. Because something remarkable was unfolding in front of them. A man everyone feared was protecting the smallest person in the room. When the girl's mother arrived 20 minutes later, she rushed into the diner in tears and pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. She thanked Cain over and over again, barely able to speak through her emotions. Cain simply nodded and said it was nothing, but it wasn't nothing, not to the girl, not to her mother, and not to the people who had witnessed it. The police later confirmed that the man who had brought the girl to the diner had a troubling history and would be questioned further. If the girl had stayed silent, the situation might have become something far worse. Instead, she had trusted a stranger who looked like the last person anyone would ask for help. Before leaving, the girl ran back to Cain and hugged him one last time. She handed him the small stuffed rabbit she had been holding. Cain tried to give it back, but she insisted. It was her way of saying thank you. And as he walked out of the diner into the fading rain, the tough biker carried that small stuffed rabbit in the pocket of his leather jacket. For the first time in years, the road ahead didn't feel so empty. Sometimes heroes don't look like heroes. Sometimes they wear leather vests. Sometimes they carry scars. And sometimes the person the world fears the most might be the very person who saves someone when it matters most. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes kindness can come from unexpected places, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. And before this story ends, I have a special request for you. In the comments below, write the words "kindness still exists," because the world needs reminders like this. And somewhere out there, a person who feels lost might read your comment and remember that humanity is still alive. Cain rode his motorcycle out of town that afternoon, the wind roaring in his ears and the stuffed rabbit tucked safely inside his jacket. But the people in that diner would remember that morning forever, because on an ordinary rainy day, a little girl proved something extraordinary. Even the toughest hearts can still answer when someone whispers for help. The rain had stopped by the time Marcus Cain started his motorcycle, but the sky above the small town was still heavy with gray clouds. The chrome engine of his bike roared to life, vibrating through the empty parking lot outside the diner. Most people inside watched him through the windows, their eyes following the large biker as he pulled on his gloves and adjusted the collar of his worn leather jacket. Inside his pocket, the small stuffed rabbit rested quietly. Cain hadn't meant to take it. He had tried to give it back, but the little girl had insisted with the stubborn determination only children possess. Now the toy sat against his chest as if it belonged there. He sat on the motorcycle for a moment before leaving, staring down the empty road that stretched out of town. For years, the road had been his only home. It had been easier that way. Easier than facing the memories he carried. Easier than remembering a hospital room filled with machines that slowly stopped making noise. Easier than remembering Emily. Cain tightened his grip on the handlebars. He could still hear the little girl's voice in his head. The fear, the quiet bravery it must have taken for her to ask a stranger for help. And something about that moment refused to leave him alone. Finally, the motorcycle rolled forward and Cain disappeared down the road. But the story wasn't over. Because sometimes the smallest actions leave the biggest marks on a life. For the next few days, Cain tried to return to his usual routine. He rode with his club, spent nights in roadside motels, and drifted from town to town like he had done for years. But something had changed. Every time he reached into his jacket and felt the soft ears of the stuffed rabbit, he remembered the girl's small arms wrapping around him. He remembered how tightly she had held on. And he remembered something else too. For a few minutes in that diner, he hadn't felt like a man running from the past. He had felt needed. 3 days later, Cain found himself riding back toward the same town. He told himself it was coincidence. But deep down, he knew the truth. Some part of him wanted to know if the girl was okay. The diner looked the same when he pulled into the parking lot again. The same neon sign buzzed softly above the door. The same smell of coffee drifted into the street when someone walked out. Cain stepped inside slowly. The bell above the door rang. Immediately, a few heads turned. Some people recognized him, but this time the looks weren't filled with fear. They were filled with something else, respect. The waitress from before spotted him behind the counter and smiled. "Back again, huh?" she said as she poured a cup of coffee without even asking. Cain nodded and sat down at the same booth he had used before. He didn't say why he had returned, but the waitress seemed to understand anyway. "She's okay," she said quietly as she slid the coffee toward him. Cain looked up. The waitress leaned against the counter and lowered her voice. "Her mom came by yesterday. Said she wanted to thank you again. That man, the one who brought the girl here, he was arrested the same day." Cain felt something loosen in his chest. The waitress continued. "The little girl keeps asking about you, calls you the biker hero." Cain almost laughed at that. A hero? No one had ever called him that before. The waitress smiled gently. "She said if you ever came back, I should tell you something." Cain raised an eyebrow. "She said you're the scariest good guy she's ever met." For a moment, Cain didn't know what to say. Then something unexpected happened. The diner door opened again, a small voice gasped, and suddenly a blur of pink ran across the room. The little girl from the diner stopped a few feet away from Cain's booth, staring at him like she had just found something she thought she'd lost forever. Her eyes lit up. "Cain!" she shouted with pure excitement. Before anyone could react, she ran forward and wrapped her arms around him again. This time, Cain didn't freeze. He hugged her back. Her mother followed close behind, smiling with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," the woman said. "She talks about you every day." Cain shook his head slowly. "It's all right." The little girl climbed into the booth across from him, swinging her legs happily. For the first time since Cain had entered the diner that morning, he smiled. A real smile. Not the hardened smirk people expected from a biker, but something warmer, something human. They talked for a while. The girl told him about school, about her favorite cartoons, and about how brave she had felt when she asked him for help. Cain mostly listened. But each word seemed to heal something inside him that had been broken for years. Eventually, the girl noticed something. She pointed at Cain's jacket pocket. "Do you still have it?" Cain slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out the stuffed rabbit. The girl's face lit up. "You kept it." Cain nodded. "I think it brought me back here." The girl grinned proudly. Then she said something that made the entire diner go silent again. "Good. Because every hero needs a lucky rabbit Time passed quietly after that. The girl and her mother eventually left, but not before the little girl gave Cain another hug. This time, it felt different. Less like fear, more like friendship. Cain stayed in the diner for another hour after they left, staring at the rabbit in his hand. He thought about Emily. He thought about the years he had spent running from pain, and he thought about the small girl who had looked past his scars and patches and simply asked for help. Sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones we expect. Sometimes they're the smallest voices in the room. Cain eventually stood up, placed money on the counter, and walked toward the door. But before he left, he turned back to the waitress. "Tell her something for me," he said. The waitress nodded. "Tell her the biker hero says thank you." Outside, Cain climbed onto his motorcycle again. The road stretched ahead just like it always had, but this time it didn't feel so lonely. And tucked safely inside his jacket pocket, the stuffed rabbit rode with him, a reminder that even the hardest lives can change direction because of one brave little voice. Before we end this story, if it touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to the channel so more people can hear stories like this. And here's a special request just before we finish. In the comments below, write "Heroes do always wear capes," because someone out there might need that reminder today. Stories like this remind us that kindness can appear in the most unexpected places. Sometimes it shows up wearing leather, sometimes it rides a motorcycle, and sometimes it answers when a little girl whispers, "Please pretend you're my dad." Red.